Yes, VFX world, welcome to episode 1 of the VFX Script Podcast with Motus VFX. I'm delighted to have this guest on with us today. She's come through the ranks at MPC, DNEG, One of Us, and now his new business at the Flying Colour Company, which I think ties in really nicely to the current climate and the importance of potential new business right now. Olivia Bond, how are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks.
Great to have you on. We're going to be covering a lot of things, strikes, how you got into the industry, all of those bits and bats. So let's sort of roll back to before VFX. We were actually having a coffee a few weeks ago, and you told me this really interesting story about sort of going into the sort of music industry first.
Oh, wow, that's way back.
I think that's quite a cool way to start.
All right. Let's go all the way back. So I guess before I even understood what visual effects was, had any idea about how I might get into it, I studied a Bachelor of Communications, which was pretty broad, if I'm being honest. I think because I didn't really know what I wanted. I was a creative person, still am. Knew I wanted to do something fundamentally creative, but of course, being a millennial, I think the message I got was, that's cool, like do your creative stuff, but you need to take your job security and future seriously. So I thought, well, okay, I'll do something really broad at uni. And I actually was working at a department store while I was at uni just to help, pay for that. And I ended up in, I think I was in the children's department, and it was a kind of fancy department store, think Harrods, but in New Zealand.
Okay, yeah.
Not quite Harrods, but that was the vibe. So, we often had some interesting characters coming into the building, and if someone looked particularly interesting, I'd always try and start up a conversation with that person. And one day this guy comes in, he's dressed to the nines, he's wearing a big suit, tie. And of course I asked him, what are you up to? And he said he was about to go and pitch a music video to one of the New Zealand channels. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. And we got chatting, and he said that, he was going to be shooting a video, and I basically just said, do you need any help? Like, I'll work for free. I'm interested. Sounds really cool. Love music. Would love that kind of exposure, I guess, and opportunity to just be involved. And he was pretty stoked with that. So he said, sure. And he made me a PA. So for me at the time, that involved going into his little studio a lot. It actually happened to be down the road from where I lived.
Nice.
And so I would just go and help with whatever. And that, I think that attitude right from the get-go served me really well. And actually by the time I got to a place where I was looking for jobs in the industry, I already had that experience. So I'm not saying that I would advocate for people to go and work for free. But at that time, I was willing to spend some of my free time doing that, which ultimately was really helpful. So, that's prior to visual effects. Wrapped up my degree. I think, I was only 20 when I finished my degree, so I was still really young, and I didn't want to stay in New Zealand, to be honest.
Okay.
It felt small. We imported a lot of our entertainment culture from North America and from the UK. So I felt like that was where all of that stuff was being generated. And I had this sense of urgency to be there and somehow find a way to be a part of it. So the only people I knew outside of New Zealand or Australia were some family friends we had in Vancouver. So I thought, all right, well, that's it. I guess I'll go there. Saved up. Went over, stayed with the family friends, and there began my foray into trying to get into film.
Awesome. And so the reason why I wanted to ask that question first was because everybody has a different sort of way in to visual effects. I feel like there's not a set
No.
this is how you do it.
And I had absolutely no idea that that was the path I was going to end up on. I didn't really understand that visual effects was even an option.
Yeah.
I saw Avatar with my mum in 2009 and thought, wow, this is sick. This
Nice.
is new, it's different, it's out there, and a really, visual effects driven film.
Yeah.
So I remember having these impressions of really cool work. So when I got to Canada, I just, went really hard with the networking. I had no leads whatsoever, no friends, no family, nothing. But I kept seeing these job postings at MPC, actually, for artist roles.
Yeah.
Again, no idea. I just kept seeing this company come up. And so a little bit of Googling, I saw what they'd worked on, and I was like, wow, okay, that's pretty cool. I like these films. I've seen these films. How do I get involved? I literally called the front desk of MPC in Vancouver, and I kid you not, I said, do you hire foreign people?
Nice.
So that just gives a bit of context. I really had no idea. Do you hire foreign people? And the guy on the desk was like, yeah. And so I kept, that was kind of my first little, all right, this could be something. I think I called him back about 3 times because he was the only person willing to give me any answer. He ended up, because I called so many times, he was like, look, there's this event happening. He gave me the time and he gave me the date. And he said, just come. So I did. I showed up. It was in downtown Vancouver at night. It was a nice venue. And went up to the guy on the door and I was like, hey, did Ryan put me on the list? And he's like, oh, yeah, sure, come on in. And walked in, and that was it. That was like that right there, just going to that event mapped out my whole future in visual effects, because it was a VES event, so Visual Effects Society meeting. So
awesome.
It was producers, supervisors, artists, recruiters, people in production. And for me, having come from this relatively small town, to find myself in this room with people who were actively working on projects that I had watched, and it was mind-blowing. I felt like I'd arrived at the Oscars.
Love
honestly.
That. Nice.
I was 21. I had no idea. So any kind of sense of fear or being in a feeling like I shouldn't be there just went out the window because I was in awe of these people around me. So I talked to anybody who would give me the time of day. And ended up speaking to a recruiter for quite a while. And he said to me, well, it sounds like you want to be a coordinator. And I just clung on to that. And I was like, okay, sweet. What do I do? And he said, go back to New Zealand, get a visa. Because at the time, I'd just come over to sort of scope it out.
Got you.
Went back to New Zealand, got the visa saved up. It took a long time. And then that was it. I packed up and moved. And it wasn't easy, to be honest. Once I got there, that recruiter had said, I'll help you get a job. But, visual effects is a little seasonal. So there's peaks and troughs. We're in a trough right now, obviously.
Yeah.
And so, it took a while, honestly. And it was through an artist I'd met at the VES event who told me to send my CV to a very specific person. And I literally had an interview on a Friday, job offer on a Monday, and that was it. And so from that point on, I started off, I didn't realize I actually skipped a couple of steps in doing that. I went in with this ridiculously optimistic and profound naivety, which I could not have got away with in London, but I could. I could in Canada.
Sure.
And that was it. I, started off in the layout department and my mind was blown, honestly. I was really taken aback by just how much work went into just one frame of a visual effects shot. So from that point on, I bounced around from layout, animation, environment. So I went into show production and just soaked it all up. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. And at one point, I really thought I'd made a mistake going into production rather than possibly pursuing the artistic side. But I was not a visual artist, so that was really not it was not going to happen. But anyway, so I'll speed up now because we're through the door. And then it was just a case of taking every opportunity I could get. Couldn't stay in Canada, wanted to, but ended up coming to London because they could sponsor me here.
Sure.
And so, again, London, knew no one, no family in Europe, no friends in Europe, off the plane, 22, kind of starting from scratch.
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of important because it feeds into my role in new business. I didn't realize it at the time, but all of these different experiences, different roles. I was so young. I had no responsibilities other than my own sort of well-being, and
I still have that now.
well, it meant that I could say yes to everything. If I felt like I needed to work silly hours, I could do it. I wasn't spending crazy amounts of money because, again, I was just looking after myself. So I literally said yes to pretty much everything. I went out loads and didn't realize that I was planting the seeds of those future relationships and networking. Spent a bit of time at MPC London, worked on The Jungle Book, Pirates of the Caribbean 5, ended up becoming the central production manager at MPC. So that was less about pipeline, being out on the floor, and more about managing production. And ultimately decided that maybe wasn't right for me. Started facility hopping, basically, to see if I actually did really want to keep staying in that field. Went on set for a little while, a bit unusual.
Nice.
And that was all because I was putting the pressure on at MPC. I was like, please send me on set. I really want to understand the broader context to the work that we do. And I was lucky that they did actually let me go. Again, sowing the seeds of those relationships that would actually become really important to my future. Became a producer, took a step back for a while, did my own creative stuff. Obviously, that's really difficult to maintain if you also want to have the other, if you want to have a house and have a family and all of these things, life changes, priorities change. So all that to say, I've now found myself in new projects at a boutique facility, the Flying Colour Company. I think they're absolutely fantastic. I've got so much respect and admiration for the company owners. They look after their team so well and have a really wonderful body of work. So it's been a long journey, and I feel like maybe that took longer than it should have, but it's all relevant in the context of actually finding myself in new projects.
100%. And like you mentioned, sort of planting them seeds like almost subconsciously, which is really interesting because, I want to ask, you was in that production side for quite some time and decided to make that switch into a new position after all those years, which on one side can be quite daunting. But on the flip side, by the sound of things, it just seems like something that was quite natural for you. What was the thought process when that sort of opportunity came about?
It was something I was actively pursuing, to be honest. So my whole career in visual effects, I've just wanted to understand more and more. I loved so much learning about how visual effects is actually, how it works, all the different technical side of things, the sitting in dailies for hours and hours listening to supervisors and really successful creative people, what they do. That was so fascinating to me. And I wanted to know, I just wanted more. It wasn't, production is great. I wouldn't say it was actually naturally what I was drawn to. In fact, I often found myself relating more to the artists, and my friends were often the artists. And I actually think that helped me in production because it meant that because I was so keen to learn about what they were doing, it made it easier for me to do my job. So by the time I got to being a producer, there were elements of it I really enjoyed. I liked doing breakdowns of scripts and thinking about how someone might shoot the work, what was involved, if you had a big budget, how you might execute that versus a small budget or something in between. I found that to actually be quite a creative process because you could sit down for hours and just imagine these things and rely on the 10 years of experience of having seen it and having understood it to a degree. So I got to the point where I was like, I actually don't like the rest of what it means to be a producer. I don't like managing deadlines, don't like creating schedules. I like the strategy side of it, but not the execution. There are people who are far better suited to that, whose personalities and sort of intuition is more suited to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've realized that actually being a part of those early discussions with clients, with directors and supervisors was far more interesting. And also the exposure of how that fits in to a business context. Again, I was really fascinated by that too. So it kind of coincided with, off the back of COVID, the strikes, and I had a baby in 2022.
Love that.
Yeah, best thing ever. But that changed my priorities as well.
Uh-huh.
It made it even more essential for me to step away from producing because you're so married to the show.
Yes.
Whereas in new business, I felt there would be more flexibility and less pressure around deadlines and crunch time and all of that.
Yep.
So that actually helped inform. So it was kind of all roads led to that place, I would say. And yeah, I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to do that at One of Us for a while and learnt loads. I had a really great mentor, and I think that sort of solidified that I was definitely in the right place. And then the opportunity came to do this at Flying Colour Company, and it was again right place, right time. And certainly is not the easiest time to go into this particular line of work,
100%.
honestly. But here we are.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty nice little transition.
Yeah. Let's get into it.
Yeah, get into I think what a lot of people are sort of racking their brains about, because there is so, I guess, little information out there. I think the BBC actually did a little piece over the weekend about sort of Hollywood sort of boom to bust right now. And there's still all these sort of blurred lines about the strikes, when things are coming back. Some people have been out of work since, May, June of 2023. September 24 now, it's pretty brutal.
Yeah.
So I guess, first of all, personally, how have you found it in terms of strikes? And how has it impacted your role as new biz, because that's a pretty tough job title to have in the sort of climate we're in now within visual effects.
Sure. So personally, I think I sort of turned away from it for a while because I was on maternity leave when the strikes were sort of really ramping up and all this uncertainty. So it seems like there were these waves of instability that sort of rippled through to now since COVID. So I think because, with visual effects, there were when the work sort of stopped, like with COVID and the strikes, there was this delayed effect because we were still able to work on the shows that were already in production. So I was lucky that I had those projects to carry on with for a while. And then, yes, I sort of watched as the rounds of redundancies sort of carried on.
Yep.
There were just so many of them. And I watched as friends of mine and colleagues didn't have their contracts renewed or were let go. And I feel like maybe for me personally, having been on maternity leave was a bit of a protective factor.
Yeah, for sure.
So it didn't mean I didn't have to fight for my position. But yeah, I was able to weather that. And it was a factor in me taking a different role, actually. So I've been lucky in that regard. But, my heart really goes out to everybody who is really struggling right now, because I hear these statistics. I don't know how they're derived, honestly, but the number that I keep hearing thrown about is between 60 and 70% of people in visual effects are actually out of work right now.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's just related to on-set client-side folk But I would, it kind of feels like maybe that does capture everybody.
Yeah.
And that's terrible. That's such a change from where we were pre-COVID, where there were actually not enough artists to do all of the work in the world. And so to flip from that, where actually artists and people in production had a bit of negotiation power and were able to lift salaries and demand more, that has completely reversed now. And I've got people who are extraordinary at their jobs who don't have work right now.
Yeah.
And that is really, really tough. And I really feel for everybody who's been impacted by that in a big way.
Yeah. I mean, even in terms of your role right now, how are you finding that? Like, is there?
I forgot that part of the question.
No. That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
No other reason. But yeah, no. I mean, in terms of your role, new business, there's people listening in right now, hopefully, and they're confused about when things are coming back. I'm sure you're having conversations with people studio side globally, and stuff. And I know that you'd actually sort of diversified a little bit and brought in a project that might be a little bit different to what people might call traditional feature and episodic, which is awesome. But from so when you started the new biz role to where you are now, are the conversations feeling any more positive, or are we still in the unknown?
We'll put it this way: the slogan I've heard is "Survive till 25."
Yeah,
I keep hearing this, and that's pretty
famous.
grim.
It needs trademarking.
It does need trademarking. Put that on a shirt.
Yeah.
It's really hard, and I think there's a lot of crystal ball gazing at the moment, and there is a huge amount of pessimism, and fair enough.
Yeah.
There is work out there, but it's being heavily gatekept, honestly.
Yeah.
People are keeping their cards close to their chest because those jobs are so precious.
Yeah.
Few and far between. So there is stuff, it is churning. I am hearing conversations. There is stuff getting greenlit. It's just not in the numbers, or the amount of projects that are out there has significantly reduced.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if things will ever go back, because actually it's not just about the strikes, it's not just about COVID, but the way we now consume entertainment has shifted really, really markedly. Streaming services, for instance, really changed the game, honestly. And I think and this is tricky because I feel like I'm commenting on this both as someone in the film industry and also as a consumer.
Sure.
So you can see sort of the interplay of these things. But I feel like things will pick up. They are picking up. In visual effects, there will always be a lag, because those projects have to be greenlit. They have to be shot. They have to make their way to the facilities. And, there have been studios who have gone bankrupt or gone bust or had to make difficult decisions to stay afloat. And I think it is quite difficult to predict exactly what that might look like. I really hope that it does pick up, and I was fortunate enough to have a couple of things to possibly bring in, again, because of the networking and because of my networking. Almost, I don't even really necessarily like that word because it makes it feel impersonal.
Sure.
So it's actually to do with the relationships and the connections and those foundational, connections, I guess, that with a difference between me being able to do that, bring in a project or not.
Yeah.
Facilities or studios, anybody now is not really in the business of taking risks. No one wants to take risks. Fair enough. So it means that there does seem to be a trend of, using the same companies, going with what what you're comfortable with, what feels safe, rather than maybe taking risks. I feel like there's just so many external forces right now that are dictating this, and it's very difficult to predict. I can only hope that it trends in the other direction.
For sure. No, that all makes sense. And I'm definitely hopeful it will.
Yeah.
And you mentioned sort of that there's always been sort of it's one way or another. There's either loads of work and not enough crew, or there's no work and way too much crew available. I'm kind of guessing in my deluded mind that actually, because of the way things are changing, and the way we consume things, in the sense of maybe these big studios slowing down on the amount of content they're producing, I'm actually kind of thinking, are we going to get to a point where we maybe don't have that constant power struggle where either there's not enough work, so there's this onus around being able to get crew for a better price, if I'm being honest, and then maybe switching that back on its head, like after, post-COVID, when there was so much content and not enough crew, the rates start hiking. So yeah, I'm in this sort of optimistic bubble that actually once work comes back, because we know it's going to come back, I think it's just how hard. As I said, in that bubble where maybe we might get to a point where there's actually just a good steady flow of production for a while, and there's actually enough crew to go around. I'm in dreamland, but
I mean, it's a nice thought, but I don't think the big studios they're just not making as many huge films in a year. They've scaled back, and you can kind of see why, because I mean, how many times did you go to the movies last year, to the cinema? I think you could say in the UK.
Good question. I actually think I went once.
There's your answer.
Yeah.
We're just regular people. The only reason I went was because baby cinema is a thing, so I could take my son
Heard about this.
to, a discounted rate in the day with loads of screaming babies.
Yeah.
And to be honest, even there would, the majority of the films I saw, there were a handful of people in the audience. That wasn't there was one film that packed the theatre, and that was Barbie. Every seat was filled and there were babies literally everywhere.
Yeah.
But that was, and you have to ask yourself why. And I think actually it was just a bit different.
Sure.
It was original, it was unique. The colours were amazing, the sets were incredible. It was just so different. People clearly are, after that kind of original content and something that has a really good story. I think days are gone now where people just want to sit in a theatre and watch explosions. We've moved past that. That's dime a dozen now. So I don't want to go to the movies and spend 40 quid on some nasty popcorn and sitting around a bunch of people on their phones. Like, I went and watched June a few months ago, and it was a terrible experience because of the other people in the room. Like, there were kids up the back, and it's just, I don't want to do that anymore. If I can lay in bed on a Sunday and watch some show on Netflix or Amazon or whatever it is, and it's got a great story, I'm going to choose that every time.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's kind of happening now. People don't want to go and spend all that money. And also people can't afford to do it anymore.
Sure.
Cost of living, all of that. There's such a big interplay of all of these different forces. So if I was, queen of a massive studio and I noticed that trend, why would you want to spend $250 million on one film?
Yeah, no.
And you're going to release that film at the cinema, sure. But if that $250 million film is on a streaming service and it's next to something that cost $5 million to produce, particularly after COVID, when all the streaming services had so much content, and this is a consumer, not as me working in film, I was quite overwhelmed by how much there was to choose from. And you almost can't tell unless someone's telling you, oh, watch this, watch that. Bridgerton, for example. No one knew that was going to be as successful as it was.
Yeah.
Huge. Stranger Things, again.
Amazing.
How do you know? Well, it's clear that there's a lack of understanding of what's actually going to do really well.
Yeah.
But what do Stranger Things and Bridgerton and these other types of shows have in common? They're original.
Yeah.
They have great storylines. The characters are interesting. They're visually pleasing. We're not using visual effects to overwhelm the audience. It's to enhance the story. That seems like a pretty good formula.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's bad that we're moving away from the $250 million tentpole way of doing things. I love that we're moving to more of a narrative-driven, storytelling. If you've got 10 episodes to tell a story, you can get into the detail. You can, see character development. You can go on a journey with the characters or with the story. It's just so different, and I love that, honestly.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I guess from a nostalgic point of view, I think what you relate to is with things like Stranger Things. I actually never watched Bridgerton. I hold my hands up.
You should.
But like the Crown, all of these, all these things, it kind of takes you back to when movies and TV were original.
Yeah.
And I think, as you were saying, it got to a point where it's like, let's just spend heaps on stuff that isn't actually relevant to the storyline. It just maybe looks cool. So that was what might get the interest or pique the interest.
Yeah.
So essentially what we're saying is, instead of spending $250 million on one thing, that's in a franchise, and ratings have just gone massively down because that franchise is just trying to churn stuff out for the sake of it, still spend that $250 million.
Yeah, exactly.
But do it on loads of original content, take a punt on scripts that you might have turned down, and that way we can keep VFX busy.
Exactly.
And sort of go back to those times when, we might not be at the cinema as much as we used to be, but essentially consuming content regularly that was good. I think back in the day, people were excited weekly that there was something new and awesome coming out.
Yeah, we get to wait for an episode to
exactly
come out.
Yeah. And because of the demand, and we want all of that good stuff, it's kind of gone by the wayside. So yeah, definitely keep spending the 250.
For sure. And to bring it back to visual effects, it's hard to work on a show like that, because often there are so many changes that happen to the script, the storyline. There are so many cooks in the kitchen at an executive level. And so it can be really disorienting as someone working on the floor of those, sort of the cascade of those decisions. The crunch times and the hours put in to meet deadlines of those types of projects is really unsustainable. Certainly why I moved away from those kind of big films, because it's a difficult thing to sustain a balanced life if the expectation is you're putting in crazy, crazy, crazy hours.
Yeah.
Often, certainly as I've moved up, with no paid overtime, but this expectation that you would do it. And, for young creative people who want to get into the industry or who want to just be a part of it, I know from my own experience that, right from the get-go, I was prepared to work for free just for the opportunity to be involved. So that meant early on in my career, I just took it. I was like, well, maybe my wage is terrible, but I'm just so lucky. I feel so privileged to just be in the room. So I'm going to take whatever crumbs are given. And I remember actually really early on, there were still these types of conversations happening even 10 years ago. But I remember thinking in my naive, time, wow, what are they complaining about? Like, aren't they just happy to be involved?
Yeah.
Easy for a 21-year-old to say with no responsibilities.
Sure.
But if you're in your 30s and you do have a family, financial responsibilities, if your family are ill, whatever it is, it's a very different type of conversation.
Sure.
And so I think that people have got away with being able to use the good grace of young creative people who just want to be a part of it. And those are the people who are really making those films happen at that, from a visual effects perspective.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that that's something we should ever want to go back to. I don't think that's a sustainable way of working, and I don't like the idea that people are being sort of made to feel like it's their responsibility for a show not delivering.
100%.
If you're an artist on the floor, you're a mid, environment, TD or whatever, and you feel like personally responsible for a show coming out. I mean, that's ridiculous, but I know that I felt that way working on projects like that. Whereas mid-size, smaller facilities, you're a lot closer to the people who are making the decisions, and they can see the consequences or the results of those decisions in front of them.
Yeah.
So it's harder to sort of get away with that. Paid overtime has been introduced at a lot of facilities. I'm not even sure if it's the law here.
No, it's not. No. So that's always something that confuses me. North America, it's the law. So if you have someone working overtime, they're on an hourly rate, and whoever is contractually responsible for that individual has to pay them.
Wasn't a thing when I was living there.
There you go.
Yeah.
I guess that's going to always, to a degree, be the nature of visual effects. There's going to be times that you work overtime, unfortunately.
Yeah.
However, it's things like that is the game changer, because people love what they do. I very rarely get people actually complain about overtime, believe it or not. Like crew that speak, because they love what they're doing.
Yeah.
However, I think it's a bit of a kick in the teeth from the European side, or the UK side, especially, that there's no thank you. In terms of, we understand that backs are against the wall.
Yeah.
But here's a thank you, and that can. I don't know where that is fixed, if I'm being honest. I don't know if that's a bidding thing and more money needs to be put into the bid to factor in for overtime, or whether more money needs to be put into the bid so that there can be extra crew factored in to remove those overtime days.
It's super tricky, and I think, hats off to the facilities who introduced paid overtime, because some have done that without the pressure of the law. They have just done that because they feel that it's the right thing to do.
Sure.
And what's interesting about just doing that as a studio, actually, you do end up making things more efficient because it's expensive to pay people overtime. So you kind of do what you can to avoid it. And that does mean, doing more efficient scheduling or just being more efficient with your time.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the bid. So, this was something that I had no idea of when I first started out in my career. But I remember being on the receiving end of what I felt were ridiculously low bids, or thinking, who bid that? Like, what? What is this? I must have felt that on every single show I ever worked on. So let's tell the story. Often when you start the bidding process, when it's perhaps the show's been greenlit or it's in development, perhaps you are tasked with doing a breakdown with no visuals. So I've had scripts laying on my desk, and it's been my job to basically create a visual effects breakdown with nothing except a script. So you're relying on your own experience and and a lot of it's really obvious. If there's a dinosaur in the scene, you're going to need a CG dinosaur. It's pretty obvious. And then you have to think, well, okay, I'm going to need an allowance for, shots in cars. I'm going to replace the windows, whatever. So there's a lot of assumptions.
Yes.
Essentially. And you don't know, if they haven't shot yet, you're actually helping inform them how to shoot and trying to bring their costs down. Because if something is shot on set, that doesn't really make sense for visual effects. It's so important to have good visual effects sort of presence on set to help reduce costs for everybody. So when you're at that stage, you've got a script, you're breaking it down, you're not really having a lot to go off. But that's when contracts are being signed, right? So a studio might give that script out to 10 facilities and they all go and do their independent breakdowns.
Yeah.
And the number that you're coming out with is such a ballpark. It really is, because you don't know. You don't know what the shots are going to specifically be. So let's say you come to me, you give me a script. I tell you, based on what your script contains, you've got a $10 million budget for the whole project. Let's say you've got $4 million to spend on visual effects. You kind of need to make that work within $4 million. It's not like you've got, well, it would be nice if you had never-ending pockets.
Sure.
But you have to make your visual effects budget work within what you have. So that means you have to partner with visual effects studio who's maybe done similar work before, who can guide you through how to get the best value out of that $4 million or pounds, whatever. That's art and science, right? So let's say you sign that contract, everyone's happy, sweet, $4 million, £4 million.
We can go any currency.
Any currency.
Yeah.
That you're going to get your edit after that. And then you're going to be in a position where you have to rebid. But that's where it gets challenging, because this relationship between a studio and a vendor, I wouldn't necessarily say you're not on a mutual footing.
Yeah.
The client always has the upper hand because they have the power to take the work away from you. And right now, when everything is really competitive, what do you have to do as a facility to stay afloat? What do you have to do to get the work in to just keep the lights on? Because actually that's a situation that a lot of companies are in. So they're not necessarily looking at the work and being like, okay, well, we know we have to do X, but actually if we don't lower our costs, the lights will not be on and we will have to let people go.
Yeah.
And that's the part of the business that's really tricky.
Yeah.
And broadly speaking, visual effects is not a very profitable industry. It's just not, because there's so much competition. There's so much underbidding, undercutting, just trying to get the work in, sending it overseas.
Yeah.
So there's all this cascade of things that happen behind the scenes to when you're sitting in front of a computer being like, what the actual? This is not going to be done in 5 days.
Yeah.
It's going to be done in 2 months. So that can be frustrating. It is frustrating, because it feels like the people making the decisions are out of touch with what's happening on the ground. Sometimes they are. But oftentimes the conversation is so much bigger than that, and there's so much more context. And, a producer has to be able to feel confident enough to go into a room with a client producer or a director or whoever's having those discussions and say, you didn't actually bid for that. This is new work. We're going to charge you for it.
Sure.
And if you keep saying, the bid was, we need to up the bid here, we need to up the bid here, and suddenly your bid is inflating by £1 million, that's tricky. And so you can see how, and now I understand how these really is delicate. It's so delicate. And to put it bluntly, if you piss a client off and they don't come back, that could be 20 to 30% of your business.
Sure.
For a year.
Yep.
So that's where, and we could talk for hours about this, honestly.
Sure.
I've got a lot to say about this, because I don't think that that's a very sustainable model.
Yeah. Because
you're not really dealing with reality. It's not fair.
Sure.
It's not fair. But this is, visual effects is such a new department when you compare it to the traditional on-set crew, where there's unions. There are actual unions to protect you. When I worked on set, it was like you felt the pressure towards the end of the day.
Yeah. Because
that crew is getting paid up until they've got their working hours. The minute you go over, boom, everyone's getting paid.
Yeah.
Visual effects getting paid? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And that is a symptom of us being involved so late as a department. Visual effects really has only been around. We're not this institutional sort of part of the process. We're so new and actually so important. We're the only department, apart from the core production team, who are on the project from start to finish.
Yep.
We have to be there at the beginning to help inform the shoot. We have to be there every step of the way, and then, of course, all the way to the end. And yet we don't really have the same protections as the on-set crew.
True.
I don't think that's right. But every time there have been efforts made to push for that, it's heavily it's not well received.
I'm definitely in the camp of I think I'm up for it. You know, I guess the thing that it's not a quick fix. It's not a short game. I think the way my brain tries to process it is, you know, even if you manage to unionize the whole of Montreal,
sure,
it's just going to go to Vancouver. You know,
absolutely. The tax credits. We haven't even spoken about the tax credits.
Yeah, you know, and it's like, even if you manage to unionize the whole of Canada, well, just come to the UK, or it'll go to France.
Completely. And I'm with you on that.
And it's like that's the real challenge. I feel like if you could unionize the whole of the VFX world, then I think people that aren't involved in visual effects would actually see how important this industry is. You know, I mean, back to the strikes, the amount of people that sort of come to me and they're like, "Hey, how's things going?" And I'm like, you know, yeah, pretty shit still. And they're like, they're like, "What? Why?" And I'm like, "Well, you know, the post-strike recovery hasn't really happened yet." And I'm like, "Well, but the strikes finished ages ago."
Yeah.
And it's like people don't, on the outside world, understand, I think, and they don't need to.
No.
But, you know, what goes into the visual effects side, you know, and I get passionate about that.
Yeah.
Because as amazing as these actors and actresses are, they are enhanced by the visual effects these days. You know, if that set extension isn't there, or if that asset isn't created, they can't feel as comfortable in that scene, surely. You know, and all these things. So I mean, I get really into that. We might have to do another episode.
Yeah, we might have to do another episode.
Yeah,
and for sure. I mean, the talent and the mastery of that is just extraordinary. And I wish there was more insight into exactly what's involved in that process. Like I said, one frame, you could have 500 people involved in creating that.
I think, like, you know, you've mentioned some really cool things about how you came through into the industry. As we discussed, there was no set way. You took the plunge, went to Canada on essentially a whim, you know, which is awesome. You know, and sort of put that out there. I mean, you've been in the industry for you know, a long time now. So definitely
making me sound old, Kurt.
Brilliant. We're the same age, I think, right?
Oh, I'm 32. Yeah.
Oh, see, I'm older. Throughout that sort of, you know, 10, 11, 12 years, I'm not sure.
About 10 years. Yeah, 10, 11.
Definitely a wise head now.
Yes.
What advice would you give yourself 10 years ago with everything that you know now?
For myself personally, I would have said, do not invest so much emotionally into a job.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not worth the stress of it. I learned that the hard way, I think. Early on, I probably put too much of my sense of self-worth and identity into my job and feeling like that was who I was. But actually, that wasn't, maybe that was okay early on, but at the end of the day, it's a business. And it was a really hard thing for me to learn, actually, was that no one was really going to have my back. At the end of the day, if a studio doesn't need you, they don't need you. And that's such a hard thing to say and to fully absorb. There were also moments where I went I invested too much of my own emotional energy into it. Maybe it was, I found myself multiple times in situations where what I was asked to do or what was a part of my job clashed with my values or clashed with what I thought was right and wrong or fair. And then I felt like I was faced with these like moral dilemmas almost. Now I'm in my 30s. I had some really big life stuff happen during COVID and sort of between COVID and almost since my son was born. And that changed everything. I lost my mum and I went through some health stuff and then I had a baby. So there were these huge life things that really brought me down to earth and grounded me, I think. And I think if I'd said these things to my younger self, like, don't invest so much emotionally, untangle yourself from that, I wouldn't have really been able to hear it. You have to be at the right point in your life to fully appreciate what that means. But it was when I was confronted by really big life stuff that I was able to actually approach my work much more objectively and say, well, I don't have to stay in this job if I don't want to. Different now because jobs are hard to come by. So there's a balance there. But yeah, I think going through some difficult stuff, now I'm like, you know what? My family is my priority. And I want to make sure that I'm doing the best I can for them. And so I'll do what I have to do. I'm not going to stay late if I don't have to. I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone. And again, that comes from maybe having been in the industry for a long time. Now I can judge when it's appropriate and when it's not to put that extra time in. But yeah, I mean, my family's everything. And then from that, now that I'm in a position where I'm responsible for others in a team, it's so important to me to manage with integrity and honesty and to always put the person first. So that's something I've always tried to lead with. And, if you are a manager or if you are a person responsible for others, it's important to uplift your team, to give them opportunities to develop, to mentor, to give extra context sometimes where it's needed. And that actually makes the work much more fulfilling, I think, is being able to be a good leader. And yeah, so I just answered the question. I think so. I hope so. But
yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I think so. And look, because strikes terrible. I'm going to constantly keep sort of manifesting that we're going to be okay.
Yes.
And people will be okay. And so on that, I want, younger people that might be listening to this or interested in getting into the industry to still go for it. It's not an industry that's going to go away, I don't think. So it's really important to have talent coming through.
For sure.
Again, obviously you spoke about the bidding and went into a bit of detail on that, and that certainly gives people clarity, because I always get passionate when it comes to bringing junior talent through. A little bit of research that I did a while ago, and it was essentially saying that there's around 1,000 reputable VFX vendors worldwide, give or take. That might have changed since I did that research. And, a junior salary across the year, when you break that down into monthly cost, and again, this could be me being totally uneducated, and people might be sort of messaging me after this and saying, you're crazy, but I find it hard to believe that, bids and projects throughout the year can't take on, just one junior member.
Sure.
And if that happened, then there'd be 1,000 new, solid 1-year juniors that are coming through, and they have to fight tooth and nail. And I get that projects have to be delivered. I get that bids require certain seniority of people, but we have to play our part as well. There's things studios need to do.
Yeah.
There's things that top tier management need to do better to allow VFX to be better. but we also, I think, have to look at ourselves as an industry in terms of what we can do. Like, two wrongs don't make a right, I guess.
For sure.
So just because we might be getting the brunt of it from others and other areas in production, like, sure, there's a way that as a collective we can keep bringing that new talent through.
Yeah, and I think some facilities do a great job of running academies and training schemes. And there seems to be a lot more out there in the way of exposure. Recently we've had groups of students come through Flying Colour Company,
nice.
just for a bit of exposure. And that's fantastic. I mean, I think that's a wonderful thing to do. But that involves a bit of a collaboration between the sort of bodies that are able to provide those students and set that up, and then the facilities who are willing to spend the time showing the students and helping to maybe light a bit of a fire in them to get involved. And I think there will always be a place for visual effects artists completely. And I don't want to discourage young people from going into it or choosing it as a path, because hopefully when everything does stabilize and become a bit more predictable, if you it can be such a good way to build a really nice life for yourself, to do cool work. It's exciting, always different. There's a very clear sort of hierarchy and pay band that you can kind of grow into, which can lead to really nice places when everything is a bit more secure. And particularly if you're an artist and you specialize in something very specific, like if you are if you pursue effects, for instance, there are a handful of people in the world who are capable of some of the specific tasks. That's a pretty cool thing. Obviously, it then becomes difficult if that particular set of skills isn't what someone's looking for. However, when it is really exciting and there's lots of work, it's just the opportunities really are endless, especially if you're a creative person. It's so hard. If you are creative and you want to make a living from, reliable and consistent living, there's 15 different departments you can go into in visual effects on a good day.
Awesome.
Optimism.
No, 100%. It's really important. And, back to the bidding thing.
Yes.
I'm really glad you went into that. It's something that I want to happen on this podcast. Because again, there's so many departments, there's so many people involved. And I think that communication sometimes isn't always there. And it doesn't need to be there in the sense of everybody knowing every minor detail of a facility. But, I think there's probably, people out there that work in visual effects that don't actually understand what is involved in bidding. And so hopefully, throughout this pod, people will start to just get snippets of info and hopefully start to have an understanding of the whole process, which I think is really cool. That's awesome. I think, just to kind of recap, strikes, we're unfortunately not sure when it's going to really come back. Numbers of hires are happening. I think, when you mentioned the 60-70% of unemployed, that number is slowly coming down, but the key word is slowly. So there's definitely a positive in the sense that number's creeping down, but we kind of need it to be like the stock exchange. We need it to just ramp.
Yeah.
And we need that 60 to get down to, zero pretty quick. And in terms of the bidding stuff, I think that was really awesome. So thanks for putting that in. So part of the pod, I kind of want to sort of bring a few things in, something that I'll ask every guest that comes on. Again, hopefully so that people can either relate to that bit of whether it's nostalgia or pub of choice, which we're going to come on to.
Yeah.
But I guess before I ask that, you've had a solid career so far, and it's certainly not over. Have you got one peak you can give
damn.
me?
One peak?
One peak.
Oh, that's...
First thing that comes to your head.
You know what? It was actually probably a couple of years ago, and this is the first thing that springs to mind. I want to say Jungle Book because that was amazing.
Yeah.
But the thing that actually springs to mind as far as an experience is concerned was getting to go to Abbey Road Studios for The Flash.
Nice.
There was some meetings we had to have, and we got some one-on-one time with the director, Andy, and he was just brilliant. And to get that sort of up close time with someone like that was really interesting. And I guess being on set for Black Widow is probably the other, apart from the fact that nearly killed me like, as a physical experience.
Right.
But getting to be sort of in that, the proximity of that. And peaks are always the people, honestly, and getting to work with, learn from really extraordinary people, Oscar winners, someone who's, at the top of their career, and not just their career, but the industry. Or, I've tried to see every step of my career as an education. I don't want to stop learning, and I don't want to stop seeing all of this as an education. So the peaks for me, those are probably two that jump to mind: Jungle Book and Abbey Road. But it's anything. It's having that exposure to those people, and I can remember certain conversations, or even watching someone's style, watching how someone with the most incredible eye can see something that no one else can.
Yeah,
and who have this vision that they're able to bring to life, and that to me is the coolest part of the job. Is getting to learn from these creative visionaries.
Awesome.
Yeah.
You know what? I think that's actually a really nice place to finish this episode. I would love to continue, and I think I'm pretty sure we could probably just continue talking the whole day.
Yeah.
But I think that's a really nice way to finish it. And there's a lot of doom and gloom currently, and no doubt we will come back from that. But it's so awesome to hear that passion and listening to that peak, because that's why I guess people get into this. So Olivia, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.